Jesus died for us. Spoken in churches, whispered in prayer, and etched into the hearts of believers, this phrase carries the full weight of Christian faith, hope, and redemption. But this is not, in itself, an explanation of what actually happened in those times. Because in history, Jesus didn't simply die. He was killed, he was mocked, brutally tortured, and murdered. His death was demanded by people, and hundreds of people watched his final moments, delighted with his suffering. For them, they were not killing the Son of God. They were killing a public enemy, one who had challenged the powerful men and religious traditions of his time. And the ones who killed him, they had no interest in salvation. The Jewish authorities feared his influence. His teachings stirred the people. He challenged long-held traditions, drove out money changers from the temple, and dared to speak with an authority that shook their foundations. To them, he was dangerous, a blasphemer, a threat to order and law. The Romans, on the other hand, saw only another problem to neutralize. Judea was a fragile land under their thumb, and any man who drew crowds, who was hailed as King of the Jews, who stirred unrest during Passover, a time already thick with tension, was a political liability. And Rome had one answer for that: the cross. So they conspired, they accused, they condemned, and Jesus was crucified, publicly, violently, like a criminal outside the city walls. The world into which Jesus walked was not at peace. It was not waiting in silence or stillness. It was burning beneath layers of politics, prophecy, and desperation. Israel, once ruled by kings from David's line, was now fractured and subjugated under Roman law. The temple, once the heart of holiness, had become an institution of compromise. The priests served under imperial watch. The people were taxed, watched, controlled. But even in oppression, the people remembered the promises, and they whispered, "He is coming." The scriptures echoed through generations. A ruler shall come from Bethlehem. A shoot will rise from Jesse. The Anointed One will be cut off. They remembered David, Elijah, Isaiah. They expected strength. They expected vengeance. They expected a man who would bring fire to Rome, raise the banner of Israel, and reclaim the land that was theirs. The Messiah would not be gentle. He would be political, a warrior, not a healer, a king, not a servant. And it was this expectation, the longing for a Savior King, that gave rise to a name, Christ. From the Greek word Christos, meaning the Anointed One, it was the translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, Messiah. In the old tradition, kings were anointed with oil, set apart for divine purpose. To call someone Christos was to declare that he was the fulfillment of every prophetic hope, the one chosen by God to deliver his people. So when Jesus was called the Christ, it was not just a name. It was a claim, a dangerous, loaded claim, one that shook both the temple and the empire. But the stage on which he stepped had been shaped long before he was born. Centuries before, Alexander the Great had entered Babylon and stood before the ruins of Etemenanke, the towering temple of the god Marduk. The ziggurat, once rising like a mountain to pierce the heavens, was known by another name in Hebrew memory, Babel, the tower that provoked heaven, the tower where the Elohim had once said, "Come, let us go down," and confuse their language. It had been man's attempt to ascend to God, And now Alexander, seeing its shattered remains, vowed to rebuild it, not for tribute, but to reclaim divinity. He called himself the son of Zeus Ammon. He entered temples not as a man, but as a god-king. His likeness was cast in marble alongside the immortals. He sought not only empires, but eternity. He was not the first man to call himself divine, but he was one the world believed. And when he stepped into Jerusalem, he didn't desecrate its temple. He restored it to its Greek identity, to what he believed it had been before Moses, before exile, before return. The gods of Greece had ruled here once, and their shadow had never truly left. This was the world Jesus stepped into, a world still echoing with the voices of pantheons, Zeus, Apollo, Artemis, Caesar, because by now, even the emperor was called divine. Caesar was a god. To serve another, to worship another, was treason. Rome did not care what gods you prayed to, as long as you bowed to the empire. But Jesus would not bow. He came from Galilee. He had no army. He made no alliances. And when he opened his mouth, he did not promise revolt. He said, "Before Abraham was, I am." It was not a metaphor. It was a declaration. He claimed eternity. He claimed the name of God. And in that single phrase, he reached back across thousands of years to a world shaped not by monotheism, but by the worship of many gods. In the cradle of civilization, ancient Mesopotamia, in cities like Ur of the Chaldeans, gods had names, domains, temples. They were said to live atop ziggurats and reign over the people. At that time in ancient Ur, the moon god Sin was worshipped, ruling the night sky from towers of stone in Abraham's homeland. The world knew gods as statues, as idols, as forces tied to sun, soil, and storm. But when Yahweh, the Elohim of the Hebrews, spoke to Moses from the burning bush, he revealed a name the world had never heard. I am who I am, the one who simply is, the uncreated, the eternal, the source of all things. The name that had once stood alone against the pantheon of Egypt, the name that shattered idols. But he spoke none of their language. He offered no altar, built no throne. He claimed not to be a god, but the God, the one before Abraham, the one before all. In that moment, he did not echo a prophet. He claimed the identity of the God who named himself, the God who had no rival. And to the leaders listening, it was not only blasphemy, it was unthinkable. It was not simply threatening, it was the end of their entire world. It was blasphemous to the ears of the temple, treasonous in the ears of Rome. His name was Yehoshua, salvation of Yahweh. But he never called God by the sacred name, not once. Instead, he spoke of Abba, Pater, the Father, not as a title, but as a reality, not as a name to fear, but as a relationship to return to. He described God not through laws, but through love, not in ritual, but in presence. He identified himself with the eternal Logos, the reason, the source, the Word made flesh, the arche, the beginning. He taught with authority that was not derived from scrolls or tradition, but from origin itself, and that made him dangerous. He forgave sins, something only God could do. He healed on the Sabbath, confronting the guardians of the law. He touched lepers, spoke with women, ate with outcasts, dined in the homes of tax collectors. He preached to fishermen and confronted scholars. He said the kingdom of God was near, and when people asked where it was, he said, "It is already among you." To the humble, it was hope. To the powerful, it was threat. Because this was not reform, it was replacement. He turned his eyes to the temple, walked into its courts, saw the merchants, the money changers, the noise and commerce that had taken root in the place once called holy, and he overturned it. My Father's house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. That moment was not symbolic. It was not passive. It was violent. It struck at the very structure the priests relied upon, the system that served both their faith and their power. It was not just a challenge to religion. It was a disruption of economy, a public prophetic act of rebellion. His popularity grew. Crowds followed him. The common people listened. That he might lead to blood, that the fragile balance between temple and empire might collapse under his name. If he was not stopped, they believed, everything would fall. They feared his life more than his death. And so they plotted, they gathered, they whispered behind stone walls, because he had not come to fit their system. He had come to expose it. He did not come to bow. He came to overturn. And from that moment on, his death was inevitable. But inevitability did not mean silence. Jesus did not hide. He moved through villages and cities with words that unsettled and works that defied all precedent. His presence began to stir not just hearts, but institutions. The crowd swelled wherever he went. Some followed him with wonder, others with suspicion, and some with rage masked as piety. With each miracle, with every healed wound and restored life, the noise around him grew louder. What had begun as whispers of a teacher now echoed with dangerous titles. Could this be the Son of David, the prophet, the Messiah, and then King? The title of King was not poetic, it was political, and in a land ruled by Caesar, such language was treason. The people who dared to call him this were not scholars or soldiers. They were peasants, women, fishermen, beggars, the ones Rome ignored, the ones the temple overlooked, but now their voices carried power, and their loyalty shifted. Jesus had not claimed a crown, but neither had he denied the claim when it rose from the people. The temple authorities knew what this could mean. So did the Romans. A king without permission was a problem. A king with a following was a threat. Jesus was not the first to be called Messiah. In the decades before and after his life, other men had claimed the title. Theudas, who promised to part the Jordan like Moses. Judas the Galilean, who led a tax revolt. Each time, Rome crushed the movement swiftly. Crucifixion was not reserved for common criminals. It was a punishment for insurrectionists, rebels, and those who dared to stir hope in the hearts of the oppressed. Rome feared messianic movements not for their theology, but for their volatility. And now, the crowd chanted again. The tension deepened every time he opened his mouth. He reinterpreted scripture, not like a rabbi quoting tradition, but as if the law itself had been waiting for his voice. He healed on the Sabbath not in secret, but in public. And when challenged, he answered not with defense, but with authority. He was not simply breaking the law, he was reshaping it. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. These words struck at the identity of the Pharisees. If they had built their authority on interpretation, he was removing the foundation beneath them, and their reaction was clear. This man must die. But it was not only the law he confronted. He exposed the entire structure of spiritual hypocrisy. He stood before the most powerful men in the temple and called them blind guides, serpents, whitewashed tombs, clean on the outside, rotting within. You devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. These were not theological debates. These were public indictments spoken in the heart of Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin heard them all. They saw him not just as blasphemous, but as incendiary. If the people continued to believe him, if they began to follow him as a leader, they feared a response from Rome. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. It was Caiaphas, the high priest, who offered the logic that would carry the conspiracy forward. It is better that one man should die for the people than that the whole nation perish. It was a calculation, not a confession. It was the reasoning of men who had once waited for the Messiah and now sought to silence him. And all of this unfolded beneath the gaze of Rome. The prefect Pontius Pilate ruled Judea with one guiding principle: prevent rebellion. During Passover, that task became far more difficult. Thousands flooded into Jerusalem to remember their liberation from Egypt. The air buzzed with memory, nationalism, and hope. Pilate knew well the pattern: prophecy, passion, and violence. He stationed extra troops. He tightened security. He watched the city for signs of unrest. And Jesus became a sign. He arrived not in secret, but in procession, riding a donkey, fulfilling the words of Zechariah, "Behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey." The people laid down cloaks and shouted, "Hosanna," a cry of salvation and also of uprising. To Rome, this was spectacle. To the temple, this was escalation. To the crowd, this was coronation. And to Pilate, it was a name, Messiah, that now required his attention. Because Jesus spoke often of a kingdom. "My kingdom is not of this world," he would say, but kingdoms, in whatever form they took, still meant power, still meant loyalty, still meant danger. The word Messiah no longer belonged to prophecy. It belonged to a man, and that man was walking freely through the center of Jerusalem, not hidden, not hunted, but deliberate. Every step Jesus took in those final days carried the weight of history and the shadow of judgment. His enemies had already decided what must be done. The decision was no longer if, but how. But Jesus did not avoid the hour. He moved toward it as though every part of him knew. This was the moment the world would be forced to decide, between power and truth, between religion and revelation, between silence and sacrifice. It was in this rising tension that he gathered his closest companions one last time. They met in an upper room, just as the city below seethed with preparation for Passover. But while others were remembering a lamb slain in Egypt, Jesus began speaking of another lamb, his own body, his own blood. He took the bread and broke it. "This is my body, given for you." He took the cup and passed it. "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for many." To those seated around him, these words did not sound poetic, they sounded dangerous. Because to declare a new covenant was not merely spiritual, it was theological rebellion. The covenant of Moses was the foundation of Israel's faith. The law written on stone, preserved through sacrifice and priesthood, was the heart of Jewish identity, And now Jesus was placing himself at the center of something new. He was not adding to the law, he was replacing the system, rewriting the covenant, and the ink would be his blood. This was not a private moment of prayer or poetry. This was an unthinkable breach, a severing from Moses, from Sinai, from the Levitical priesthood. For generations, the covenant had been preserved through temple rituals, through lambs, fire, incense, and priestly lineage. And now Jesus was saying that covenant has ended. A new one begins here with me. The echoes of Exodus were all around them, not just the memory of deliverance, but the precise pattern of the ritual. In Egypt, the blood of a lamb had marked the doors of the faithful. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, God had said. It was not the strength of the people that saved them, but the sacrifice. And now Jesus, holding the cup, was claiming that sacrifice for himself. No temple, no altar, no priest, just bread, wine, and the lamb. Still, among the 12, one had already made his decision. Judas, once trusted, now moved with silence and intent. He had spoken with the temple guards, arranged a signal, counted the coins. 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. And now, while Jesus was still breaking bread, Judas sat and listened, and when the meal was finished, he rose and left. The others did not understand, but Jesus did. The wheels of betrayal had already begun to turn. Later that night, they crossed the Kidron Valley and entered Gethsemane, a garden outside the city where olive trees grew twisted and ancient, and the sky hung low with weight. It was here that Jesus began to stagger, not in body, but in soul. He withdrew from his disciples and fell to the ground. The Gospels record no sermon, no teaching, only a cry. Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. The cup, filled not with wine but with wrath, the judgment of sin, the burden of every generation. And yet, he did not resist. Not my will, but yours be done. It was not soldiers who brought him down. It was surrender. And in that darkness, the betrayal unfolded. Judas arrived, leading armed guards by torchlight. The kiss he gave was not affection. It was identification. This was the man they wanted. Jesus made no attempt to flee, no command to fight. And yet, as they seized him, the disciples panicked. They scattered, running into shadows. Even Peter, the boldest, would not return. By the time the chains were fastened, Jesus stood utterly alone before the empire, before the temple, before the judgment of history. He would face every power the world could offer, unshielded, unsheltered, and unwilling to turn back. Because this was not only about what men were plotting, this was what he had chosen. The hour had come, and the cross was no longer a threat in the distance. It had become the conclusion everyone was moving toward, whether they admitted it or not. And now, all that remained was to put it in writing. After his arrest, Jesus was taken not to Rome, nor to the common court, but to the Sanhedrin. The religious elite of Israel, scribes, elders, high priests, sat cloaked in midnight shadows. They did not need to deliberate. They needed a charge. The witnesses lied, contradicted, faltered. Still, they pressed forward. And then the high priest stood and demanded the truth. "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed?" Jesus answered, "I am." And then, as if lifting a curtain over eternity, He added, "You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." That statement tore the room open. It was not political, yet it would trigger political violence. It was not violent, yet it would justify the blood that would follow. It was a claim that touched the heavens, but it was heard as a threat in the halls of religion and empire. For Jesus had quoted Daniel 7, a vision of divine authority, of judgment, of a figure who stands beside God himself. They heard it clearly, and they judged it unacceptable. Blasphemy. According to the law, a crime punishable by death. But under Roman rule, they could not kill him themselves, and so they began the transformation from spiritual accusation to imperial crime. Pilate, the Roman governor, had no interest in Jewish doctrine. He did not care about blasphemy or messianic dreams. What concerned him was order, the preservation of Caesar's peace. And now, before him, stood a man who was being called King of the Jews, a title that in Rome's eyes could mean only one thing: sedition. He questioned Jesus. "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am." Not protest, not panic, just a statement, quiet, unshaken, immovable. Pilate examined him, listened, observed. He had judged hundreds before, zealots, rebels, thieves. But this man was different. There was no fear in his eyes, no desperation in his words. He did not defend himself. He did not beg. And Pilate said to the crowd, "I find no fault in this man." But they cried louder. And in that cry there was fear, not just of Jesus, but of what would happen if he were allowed to live. Because to let him go was to admit the system had been wrong. It was to risk everything. The priests shouted, the people shouted, and Pilate hesitated. They said, "If you release him, you are no friend of Caesar." That phrase struck deeper than any argument of law. It was not a legal appeal. It was political blackmail. Pilate knew a ruler who tolerated a rival king was himself a traitor. And so, to protect his position, to preserve the peace, and to please the crowd, Pilate gave them a choice. One prisoner would be released, Barabbas, a convicted murderer, insurrectionist, a man of real violence, or Jesus, silent, beaten, accused of nothing but words. The crowd chose Barabbas. Pilate asked why, but the answer did not matter. The crowd had tasted blood, and Pilate, in an attempt to wash his hands of guilt, handed Jesus over. But what did he see in that man? This Jesus, standing silent in the face of injustice, not resisting, not pleading. Some say Pilate trembled. Some say his wife had warned him in a dream. And centuries later, others would wonder, did he suspect something more? Did he feel it, even faintly, that this man was not just a prisoner, that something eternal was unfolding right in front of him? Some would say later that Jesus died for the world, that he bore sins, not his own, that he stepped into this sentence willingly, that he was not trapped, but chose it. Not everyone believed this, but the mystery of it lingered. Then came the Roman sentence. He was scourged, flogged by whips laced with metal and bone, designed to tear muscle from bone, the kind of punishment reserved for enemies of the state. It was a warning to others, a public ritual of shame. Then they mocked him, draped him in purple, pressed a crown of thorns into his skull. They spat, they struck him, they bowed before him in cruel sarcasm. "Hail, King of the Jews," they laughed. But in their laughter, they told the truth, because this was a king without soldiers, a king without a sword, a king who would conquer by being conquered. And the sentence was set. He would die between criminals outside the city gates, crucified under a title written in 3 languages: Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek for all to read, from priest to peasant, from soldier to slave. It was not a proclamation. It was not an act of honor. It was a warning, a threat. Rome crucified kings it had not crowned. It did not just kill bodies, it killed symbols, ideas, movements, and it made sure the world was watching when it did. The procession began. Jesus, bruised and bleeding, staggered beneath the weight of his own crossbeam. The same streets that once echoed with Hosanna now buzzed with silence, or worse, curses. Blood from the scourging soaked his back. Thorns pressed into his brow. There were no soldiers standing at his side, no angels descending from heaven, just Roman guards, a few women weeping, and a man from Cyrene seized from the crowd to carry what Jesus could no longer bear. They led him outside the city walls to a hill named Golgotha, the skull, a place where criminals were exposed. There they stripped him, stretched his limbs, drove iron spikes through his hands and feet, and raised him up, not to elevate, but to shame. Suspended between heaven and earth, between crime and righteousness, not as a bridge, as a spectacle. And this moment, this very hour, unfolded during Passover, the most sacred night in Israel's memory, the night when death passed over Egypt and spared the homes marked with blood. "When I see the blood," said the Lord, "I will pass over you." Each year, every family remembered the Lamb, the one slain in their place, the one whose life stood between them and judgment. And while the priests in Jerusalem offered those lambs in the temple, another lamb was being lifted outside the city, not inside the veil, but outside the gate. No altar, no fire, only wood and nails and silence. And the angel of death would not pass over this time. It would come, but not for the guilty. It would come for the Lamb. At the foot of the cross, Roman soldiers laughed. They divided his clothing, rolled dice for his robe. They did not know they were echoing the words of Psalm 22. "They pierce my hands and my feet. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing." The religious leaders, standing just beyond, sneered, "He saved others. Let him save himself." But he did not come to save himself. He came to give himself. And still, no one truly understood what they were witnessing, a prophecy of a Messiah not enthroned, but removed. And still others, remembering the first Passover, would look at him and say, "There is the Lamb, pure, chosen, slain, not for himself, but for the world, so that death, seeing his blood, might pass over." He did not cry out for rescue, but in his agony he spoke, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It was not confusion. It was quotation from Psalm 22:1. A cry that opened the most desperate psalm and led eventually to praise. And then the sky darkened. At noon, the sun itself retreated. The earth began to tremble. And in the temple, at that very hour, the veil was torn, not by hands, not from the ground upward, but from top to bottom. The curtain that separated man from the holy, the veil that guarded the presence of God, was ripped open. For generations, only one man could enter that space, once a year, with blood. Now, it was open, the barrier undone, the system rendered obsolete. Because the real offering was no longer behind a curtain, it was nailed to a cross. And those who held the law could not see it. Those who feared rebellion had crushed the one man who spoke peace. Those who served Caesar had executed the one called Christ. The priests tried to preserve their nation. Pilate tried to protect his rule. Rome tried to crush a name before it could become a kingdom. But in doing so, they fulfilled everything they were trying to prevent. Because they did not just kill a man, they tried to erase a name. But some would later say that the blood on the wood was the sign of a new covenant, that what looked like failure was fulfillment, that the shame became glory, that the Lamb who was slain was worthy. And the world, whether it believed or not, would never be the same. The earth had shaken, the veil had torn, but the cross still stood. The sky, now dark at midday, held its breath. And beneath that blackened silence, Jesus remained, suspended, broken, bleeding. Mockers had fallen quiet. Soldiers stood still. Even the crowd, once ravenous, seemed sobered by something they couldn't name. To the empire, he was a failed rebel. To the temple, a condemned heretic. To many, a disappointment. But to heaven, this was the altar. And even here, in the place of agony, he gave. He looked upon those who drove the nails and said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." They had not asked for mercy. They had not understood the moment, but he asked for their pardon anyway. Mercy was not something he gave to the deserving. It was the overflow of who he was. No vengeance, no bitterness, only compassion, even now. And then, as time bent around this final hour, he spoke again, "It is finished." Not "I am finished," not "they have won," it is finished. The burden carried since Gethsemane, the cup of wrath, the weight of sin, the cost of reconciliation, had been poured out. The law had been fulfilled, the covenant completed. The task, the mission spoken in heaven and whispered through prophets, had reached its end. Later, they would look back and say, "This was Isaiah's servant, pierced for our transgressions. This was Daniel's anointed one, cut off and left with nothing. This was the Lamb of Passover, whose blood turned death away." The shadow of Exodus loomed behind the cross. That night, when the angel of death passed through Egypt, yet passed over every home marked with the blood of a lamb. In Jerusalem, the priests were offering sacrifices by tradition, but outside the walls, the lamb they had rejected was offering himself. No priest held the knife, no altar caught the blood, and yet the sacrifice was real, not for one household, but for all. He had said before, "No one takes my life from me. I lay it down of my own accord." And now, with the world watching, he did exactly that. His voice cracked from blood and thirst, but one final sentence rose above the silence. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." He bowed his head, and the last breath left his body. Heaven did not speak. Earth did not move. He was gone. They had killed him. They had murdered the one they feared. Maybe not because he was guilty, but probably because he would not be silent.